Okay, thank you for joining us. We're going to get started now. Just so you're aware, everybody is on mute right now. I have muted everybody and will unmute your lines when we have time for questions and answers at the end. And if you have questions in the meantime, just pose them in the chat window on the WebEx. But let's get started. So this is Chad Ramsey. I'm Vice President of Policy here at Ovarian Cancer Research Alliance, and I'm with Vanessa Kramer.
Hi, this is Vanessa Kramer, and we are so happy to have you guys on the line and to have you in DC in T-minus 10 days, thereabouts.
That's right, and if you're with us live, thank you very much for taking the time. If you're watching this on recording, thank you for taking the time to watch us then, and no fast forwarding.
And just to give you a flavor of what we're going to go over, this is going to be pretty top level because remember we do have an all-day training on that Monday, March 4th. So the idea of this webinar is to give you a taste of what that training will look like, what our legislative asks will be, and so you know what to expect come Advocacy Day.
Great. So let's get started. There's a beautiful picture of you all.
From last year.
And we'll run through what our agenda is going to look like tonight.
So, as I mentioned, this is bare bones, kind of broad strokes, what to expect. We're going to go much more in depth on each of these during the training. But the first part of the webinar is going to be logistical information, kind of what the training looks like, and the second part is going to be what you're walking into. So this is going to go over the congressional landscape, where we are right now. You know, we're coming off of the heels of a historic government shutdown. This is to give you a sense for the mood, what the mood is going to be on Capitol Hill. And then the last part is our ask. These are what we're going to ask that you go into your members of Congress's offices and ask. These are the policy asks. So, and then at the end, as Chad noted, hopefully we will have time for a Q&A, but if not, you can feel free to reach out to Chad, me, or Abby with any follow-up questions. So that's just a quick breeze through the agenda.
We've heard from a couple people that it was a little difficult to hear, so we tried to adjust our positioning so that it would be a little bit better. Hopefully that worked. If it didn't, continue to message us in the chat, and we'll try to make things better. So here we go. We wanted to start this year. Vanessa had the idea of talking a little bit more about what you would expect for Advocacy Day, especially for those newcomers who've never been to an event like this before. We wanted to just give you a little sort of information of what you could expect when you're here in DC.
So this is our all-day training. It starts at 10 a.m. and it goes to 5:30 p.m. And it's broken down into sections, and we're finalizing the program now. So next week we should have something ready to share. But it will be primarily Chad and myself doing the training, and we're hopeful to get a couple of guest Hill staffers to offer their perspective as a Hill staffer on what a good meeting looks like. But then we have dress is casual for the training day. We're all going to be in a conference room cooped up together, so no need to look especially nice. Save the big guns for the next day on the Hill. And I would say for the Hill, it's business casual. Most importantly, you are going to want to wear shoes that are comfortable to walk in because you're going to be walking long ways. And of course, a splash of teal. The image at the beginning of the slideshow, you saw everyone in their teal. We do a customary photo shoot on the Capitol steps each Advocacy Day, and we're going to be doing that this year too.
That's right. And now the hotel, the Hyatt Regency, is right down the street from the Capitol building, and it's a couple blocks from Union Station as well. So it's ideally located, and you'll never have to be too far from the action at this hotel. It's a large hotel, and it's where all of our training and all of the events will take place on Monday. So it's very convenient. Hopefully people will find it comfortable.
Right, and then the next day we do have a hot breakfast to kick off the day for Hill meetings, and again, that's at the same hotel. So a few things about Hill meetings in general, that day of Hill meetings. For those of you who have not experienced Capitol Hill before, it is a beehive of activity. It's teeming with people in their 20s, I would say. Capitol Hill staffers are pretty young guns, who are doing very important things for very important people, or so they'll have you believe. But your meetings, everyone can expect to have 3 meetings. This is 2 meetings on the Senate side with both of your senators, and then 1 meeting on the House side with your representatives.
Now, it's possible that you will attend more meetings than that. Oftentimes, people will want to attend meetings that their fellow advocates have if they're available to go, and we do encourage that as long as there aren't too many people in the meeting. It can become a little bit overwhelming if there is a large group, particularly on the House side, where the spaces that you meet are sometimes quite small.
And this might be later in the slide, but just want to give everyone an assurance that if this is your first time doing this with us, we have gone to great lengths to ensure that you won't be meeting alone with any of your members of Congress, meaning that we've heard from a lot of people that they prefer to be in groups, especially newbies. So just want to ease any concerns to that end, that no one is, unless you want to be, no one is going to be doing meetings alone.
That's right. And when you arrive at the training, you will receive your personalized schedule. It will be in your folder at the training. So you'll be able to look and see exactly when your meetings are and with whom. We expect, what we try to do generally is have your Senate meetings in the morning between 10 and noon, and then the House meeting in the afternoon between 1 and 3. That's what we've generally tried to do. It doesn't always work out that way. People are very busy around this time. But that's what you should expect with when you get your schedules.
But that being said, there is a chance, and a good chance at that, that you will have gaps between meetings, and potentially long gaps. You know, in the morning you might have a 9:30 meeting on the Senate side, your second Senate meeting might be at 10:30, and then you might not have your last meeting until 3. And if that's the case, we encourage you to come back to the hotel. We'll have a room where we have snacks, and people will be writing thank yous. Maybe. Oh, okay.
If we can smuggle in some Oreos.
Yes, possibly snacks, no promises. Or you can wander around Capitol grounds. I think it's really interesting just to see all the hubbub and activity. There are also botanical gardens on Capitol grounds that you can go to. Or, of course, you can get a Capitol tour through the Capitol Visitor Center. And you can do that pretty easily just by walking up. You don't need to make arrangements in advance. So just want to manage expectations that it would be beautiful if we could stack meetings such that they were one after the other after the other. But realistically, that's not something we can do. So be prepared for long gaps.
Yeah, and as Vanessa said, there's lots of things to look at. You can walk outside and take a selfie in front of the Supreme Court. You can walk into the Library of Congress. It has a beautiful reading room that you can just walk right into and look at the overhang, and you can see that beautiful location. So if you haven't had that opportunity, it's a good time to do that. We do recommend you stay close to the Capitol and stay within walking distance, because meetings, sometimes it can take a little bit longer to get to than you hope. The buildings can be a bit of a maze sometimes, so you'll want to give yourself time between meetings. Also, you'll have to go through security probably twice while you're going to meetings. And the security is like a sort of a watered-down version of airport security. So you don't have to take any liquids out of your bags or anything like that, but you will want to make sure that you don't have an excessive amount of metal on your clothing before you go through the magnometers.
All right, so this slide is really so that you recognize your place in all of this. So you are constituents. A constituent, for those of you that don't know, basically means that you live in a member's district, i.e. you vote for that member. So that means that that member is accountable to you as a voter, as a constituent. And I think that it's important that we properly empower you to understand how you can shape your members' positions on various policies as a constituent. First of all, the fact that you are coming here in the flesh and going to meet with a staffer from your members of Congress's office says a lot. That says that you are active and that you're watching and that you care. And anything you ask of them is going to hold weight because it's ultimately their job security. Chad and I can go into these offices and we can bang our fists and ask them to do all sorts of things for the ovarian cancer community, but ultimately we don't really have power because we don't vote for them. Your vote is your power.
And furthermore, you are a constituent, but also if they remember you, if they realize that there's some reason that they can help you, if there's something that sparks in them that is a reminder every time you walk in that there's something that they can do for you, it's so important. We have tons of stories of people that we know that have formed personal relationships with members of Congress and their staff. And it really has a big impact when we ask them to do things, when we ask them to support bills, we ask them to support letters that we're trying to get signatures on. Those sorts of relationships, those memories can really have a tremendous impact, an outsized impact than anything else that I can really think of. Those personal relationships, those personal touches that have a real impact on legislation.
Yeah, and to that end, you know, if you're trying to be influential, make yourself bigger. You know, link up with neighbors, friends, other constituents, and ask that they contact your member of Congress and echo the same message. Use social media platforms to make yourself bigger. Remember, the squeaky wheel always gets the grease, especially in advocacy. So be bigger, louder, better. And we'll go more into this at the training, ways to really develop your influence.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a couple of things to keep in mind going in. Your story is your currency. We, of course, are going to go over legislative ask and give you some nuts and bolts policy 101 stuff at the training, but no one is expecting you to be an expert on the ins and outs of policy. The main point for you being there is to build this relationship and share your story. That's your currency.
That's right. And keep in mind, when you meet with members of Congress or staff, you're probably going to be the expert on the issue. They deal with a lot of different issues. They deal with process on the Hill. They have a wide breadth of knowledge, but you are the only expert on your story and the asks that you'll be bringing forward. So you should feel comfortable that you probably know more than they do going in.
Definitely, definitely. And in fact, we'll talk about this more at the trainings, but a great first question and a great way to open up these meetings is, have you ever met anyone with ovarian cancer? And oftentimes, these staffers say no. So it's a powerful experience and you're in a position of influence.
That's right. And as we note here, cancer is a nonpartisan issue. That is to say, it affects anybody from any party, any creed, any socioeconomic background, as you well know. And so you can't make any prejudgments on how somebody might accept you or somebody might stand on a particular position because of their political party. Some of our biggest allies have come from one side of the aisle or the other, and it really doesn't make a difference which party that they represent. It matters what sort of experience they have. On a lot of different things. And so, for instance, Sean Duffy, who is the member of Congress on the Republican side, who's the co-chair of our caucus, we got in touch with him because of a personal connection, a family member being affected by ovarian cancer. And he and his staff have become staunch supporters. And so you really ought to, even if you see someone on Fox News or MSNBC spouting some horrible party line politics one way or the other, that doesn't mean that they can't be an ally for what we're trying to do. Even if you disagree with them 100% on everything else, they may support us on their cancer policy positions.
That's right. That's right. We really do want to emphasize that we not talk about partisan politics in these meetings, and we'll get into more of that later, but that also we go into everything with an open mind, because you never know where you're going to find support, and frequently it's in places you least suspect.
That's right. And as we note here, this is the first date of a long courtship, or it could be for many of you the fourth or fifth date. You might be in the double digits for some of you, which is great. But for those of you who haven't, this is the beginning of a relationship, and it's very likely that, let's say down the road, this staff member or this member of Congress all of a sudden finds about somebody that's affected by ovarian cancer. Well, they're going to remember you. They're going to reach back out to you. That's happened many times in our history. And so be mindful of that, that this is a relationship, find common ground, and continue to follow up.
And I think there's actually a really good example of that. A lot of times we have had advocates go meet with staffers in their members of Congress's office and really hit it off, and then what happens is that staffer moves offices and goes and works in a new congressional office, and that staffer and the advocate will stay in touch. Even though the staffer is no longer working for that advocate's member of Congress, it's like that it gave life to that relationship in and of itself. And I know for some of you who are on the webinar who are old veterans, we've even reached out to those folks in their new offices and requested meetings on your behalf.
Great.
All right, so this is, I feel like this is a constant refrain, but it is true because we will have 7 glorious hours together in a couple of weeks. But more to come at the training. There will be mock meeting demonstrations and role play. There will also be a panel of guest Hill staffers who can provide tips and tricks from the inside. And then at the very end, there will be ample time to meet with your meeting group and practice your pitch. And then, as we mentioned earlier on, if this is your first time, we have ensured that you will not be flying solo for any meetings, unless, of course, you want to.
Yep. So why does Advocacy Day matter? Now, we think you probably have a pretty good idea, since many of you have already come. And those of you who haven't been with us before, you decided to get involved and join us. But we thought we'd remind you here of some of the most important things and why we think your advocacy is so important.
Yeah, and so strengthening grassroots network and support nationwide. So that really gets at how it is important. We are a national organization, and it's important that the advocacy piece of our organization convene annually just to get everyone in the same room. Some of you are super active at the state level, and I think it's good to be able to connect, and it helps us build our profile in Washington, D.C. and on Capitol Hill. So it's dual serving.
That's right.
And again, leveraging constituent influence in advance of 2020 elections. That is kind of where policymakers' heads are right now, member of Congress's heads are. And so people are listening to you more than they are to us. The grassroots voice is really important in advance of the 2020 elections. And then the next one, timing of important policy decisions. So this is old hat for a lot of you, but as some of you know, it's appropriations season. And so appropriations is when we put in funding requests for funding levels for our PET programs. That would be the programs of interest to the ovarian cancer community for fiscal year 2020. And fiscal year 2020 starts on October 1st, 2019, and goes through September 30th. So in springtime every year, appropriators start drafting those numbers for the next fiscal year. So it's a good time to get in and talk to members of Congress now during this process.
That's right. And as you know, because it's been the topic of news story after news story, these appropriations bills have been delayed oftentimes, and sometimes we're left almost without funding or shutting down the government. There's a real hope that we'll follow part of last year's example and get most of the appropriations bills passed before we reach a deadline. I've heard rumblings this year that it's likely that the regular order process will again move forward on appropriations. We expect things to be in full gear in March on the appropriations process and hearings into April. So as of now, you're coming at a terrific time with respect to appropriations requests.
Yeah.
You never know, though, what could hit. There could be...
Famous last words, right? Chad's really tempting fate.
The Mueller report could hit the day we arrive. You never know. So it's smart to be agile and nimble, but know that we will do everything we can to make sure you're prepared for anything that comes up at the last moment. And the last bubble here on this slide that I think is really important is identifying new allies and champions. This is something that we find every year that we're able to do, and that's find somebody who you wouldn't have known had a connection to ovarian cancer, or some great staffer who's really gung-ho, or some member of Congress who really wants to step in and take on a leadership role. You can find those people. You will meet with those people and create those relationships, and by doing that, you will make us a much stronger movement. And so if you can identify those people, help find new allies and champions, and then let us know about your meetings, that will be incredibly, incredibly helpful.
Yeah, and to dovetail that, all of you will complete meeting feedback forms. And what Chad and I will do after we get all of these forms is we'll look at them and we'll pick up on threads so that we can start grooming new champions to be active on ovarian cancer. So, in your meeting feedback form, if you say such and such staffer has a personal connection and is really interested in getting their boss more engaged on this aspect of ovarian cancer or that aspect of ovarian cancer, then Chad and I take that as a call to action. So it really is great to have our advocates. They're almost agents kind of liaising between us and their members of Congress.
Yep.
All right, rah.
Yeah, so a lot of changes happened last November. It was a real eventful election, and it ushered in a change in leadership in Congress and a lot of new faces, particularly a lot of new women.
Yeah, which is super exciting. And in the House, an especially diverse class of freshmen. We'll go to the next slide here. Yeah, so in the House, you can see, and there is a Senate inclusion here at the end, but we have lots of firsts for women. More diversity than we've ever had before, which is super exciting, and just more women generally, which is really, really great, especially for ovarian cancer because it is a woman's issue. Yes,
and we think that we're liable to find more people with a direct connection to ovarian cancer, at least more receptive ears. And the class in general seems to be very eager to make their mark and stand out from a traditional new Congress. And so we think that our issue in ovarian cancer advocacy in general is well positioned to have an impact.
All right, so this is a look at where we are after the election. So Congress is under split party control, meaning that the Democrats control one chamber, they have the House, and the Republicans control the Senate. Now, importantly, the Republicans control the Senate very narrowly. They have 53 votes to Democrats' 47. That includes 2 independents who caucus with Democrats, so they're essentially counted as Democrats. But in the Senate, as some of you may know, really most acts of major legislative business require cloture. And a cloture vote, to vote cloture on something, essentially means ending the debate. That requires a 60-vote majority threshold. So even though the Senate has, or even though the Republicans have a majority in the Senate, they don't have that super majority, that 60-vote majority, which is really considered, that's the money. So the Democrats in the House have a safe margin over Republicans. But I think one thing that's interesting to note and has long been an issue with the Tea Party is now we're seeing this left flank of Democrats, especially in the House, kind of rise up. This is the Progressive Caucus. And so there's potential for some infighting there, just like we see the Tea Party. We saw the Tea Party rise up and there was infighting among the Republicans, the Tea Party. So just something to be aware of.
Yeah, and all that is to say that the dynamic has changed a little bit. But before and for the past several years, the House has been held by Republicans. They've been able to be sort of aggressive on conservative issues in passing their appropriations bills and moving it forward. And then we see the Senate sort of act as a moderating force. It will be interesting to see how the bills move forward with the Democrats in control, generally wanting to being a little bit more free with the spending on healthcare-related issues, and seeing what kind of impact the Senate relationship will have. So we don't exactly know how it's going to go yet, but we know that things start in the House, so that's where we hope to find a receptive ear with Appropriations Act. And as you see at the last bullet point, we have an unpredictable administration, and that is true not just the man who sits in the Oval Office, but the administration in general is a bit more unpredictable than we're accustomed to in Washington, D.C. So there are sometimes moves that happen at the last minute or at the agency level that we need to be ready to counter or support.
All right, so this is more on what you're walking into. So those are kind of the potential obstacles to getting stuff done. The good news is that there is some real bona fide bipartisan interest in returning to regular order when it comes to budget and funding matters. So to Chad's earlier point, I feel confident that for fiscal year 2020, there is going to be a renewed appetite and commitment to actually banging through some of this stuff.
Yes.
And each chamber passing their spending bills and then reconciling them somewhat on schedule, meaning before September when this fiscal year ends. So that is the good news coming off of the historic federal shutdown. Similarly, we're not going to go too in depth, but just because it's health related and something to be aware of, there is also bipartisan interest in acting on policy proposals to contain healthcare costs for patients. And two that we're watching really closely are the drug pricing reform debate that's happening right now in the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and then surprise medical billing. We're seeing a lot of activity on that over on the Senate side. So there's a possibility for some meaningful action to come on one of those two issues.
Right, and we don't expect that to be a big part of our advocacy day this year, but it is something that we'll probably come back to you later on if there's an opportunity to weigh in with your members of Congress or sign a letter or make a phone call, something of that nature. But either way, we'll be watching it very closely and trying to push for the needs of ovarian cancer patients.
Yeah, and then the last little nugget is just for your situational awareness. What we're seeing a lot of and what pundits expect to continue to see is Democrats using the gavel in the House, using their newfound leadership position to push issues that will set them up well in advance of the 2020 election. So a few of these issues, these are the issues that poll well among Americans but put Republicans in a jam. By way of example, climate change, gun control, these are these sort of wedge issues. We'll see a lot of activity on those in the House, but again, because the Republicans have the Senate, it's not too likely that those will go anywhere in the Senate.
And we expect that Leader McConnell will do the same thing in his chamber. In fact, he's already planned to vote for the Green New Deal, which he thinks will be troubling for Democrats running for the Democratic nomination to run for president. if they have to cast votes, that may be tricky. So we'll see it on both sides of the chambers. So here we run through just quickly the key committees, and we won't spend too much time on here, but these are the committees that deal with healthcare-related issues and particularly ovarian cancer-related issues. We're going to focus primarily on just a couple of these committees as we move forward.
Yeah, and I also want to mention that this will be really drilled down on during the training, and among training materials, we're providing you with committee rosters, so you'll understand what it means if your member is on one of these committees. We'll actually make that come full circle at the training. But just putting a bug in your ear about it right now, there are 4 committees plus the appropriations committees that we care about.
That's right.
And for those of you who are brand spanking new, congressional committees are basically, they take the lead on certain issues. So we've listed the issues, they're all, as Chad noted, healthcare related. But if a congressional committee has jurisdiction over an issue, they can hold hearings about that issue or advance legislation that affects that issue. That's
right. And when we talk about the Appropriations Committee in particular, folks that are on that committee are going to be of high interest to us early on because they will have a real opportunity to have an impact on how much the federal government puts towards ovarian cancer research and education programs. So here we are, a little bit more on the Appropriations Committee.
Yeah, and this again is when things go through regular order, but we're going to assume that we're going to be more like regular order than we have been in years past. So the quick and the dirty is that each chamber has their appropriations committee, and there are 12 subcommittees within each appropriations committee. These 12 subcommittees correspond with appropriations bills, and they all relate to groupings of agencies. So there's a subcommittee, a Department of Labor and Health and Human Services subcommittee that we care about. We care about 2 of these 12 individual appropriations bills.
Right, and that's the Labor H bill, the Labor H subcommittee, or Labor, Health and Human Services, and that contains funding for the National Institutes of Health, the CDC, and other agencies that are important to us, and the Department of Defense subcommittee, which has funding for not just defense-related issues, but the congressionally directed medical research programs, of which the ovarian cancer research program is housed. So those are the 2 important appropriations subcommittees as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, and we recognize that this is a lot of information and a lot of acronyms, and again, want to assure you that we're going to go over, because I know some of you probably want to know, Department of Defense, why on earth would we care about a program that's funded under Department of Defense? All of these questions and more will be answered at the training, but the short takeaway is we care about 2 of the appropriations bills, DOD and Labor H. And that sets it up for a preview of our ask.
Woo!
So this is the short list. And before we go over this, I just want to assure you fact sheets and more information will be provided at the training, but this gives you a taste.
And we're also going to send out information with respect to our asks as soon as we have it so people can have it to look over. So we're not getting into a lot of detail here, but we'll run through it.
Yeah, so on the House side, the House and Senate appropriations asks are the same because they fund the same program. So we care about the OCRP, which is under the DOD's CDMRP, a mouthful, but we care about that ovarian cancer research program under the Department of Defense. And then under, and actually if we go, here we go. Then under Labor H, we care about NIH, the sub-agency, NCI, National Cancer Institute. We care about that top-line funding level. And one thing about that, just to be aware of, is that number, our ask there is going to be pretty big, and that's because obviously not all of it goes to ovarian cancer. Ovarian cancer gets a smaller piece of the pie because the idea is that funds all cancer research. So we have NCI funding, and then at CDC, there are two funding lines we care about. One is Johanna's Law, which funds a lot of different ovarian cancer programs. It funds some research. It also importantly funds Inside Knowledge, which is the gynecologic cancer awareness campaign and those materials, public awareness campaign. And then the other thing we care about under CDC is the Ovarian Cancer Control Initiative, which is OCCI. So there are three programs under Labor H that we care about, and then that one program under Department of Defense. So in all, we have 4 programs that we are requesting funding for 2020. And part of the way we're doing that, we're requesting funding for these, and we'll give you those fact sheets to leave behind with your members. But there's also a Dear Colleague letter to appropriators for the DoD program that requests program funding for 2020. So there's, not only do we want you to be supportive of these funding levels, we want you to sign on to this letter in support of this funding level.
That's right. There's sort of different levels of support that you can provide. A Dear Colleague is a pretty common tool used on the Hill, but it really commits members of Congress to support a certain level. And so we'll want to run the numbers up and get as many supporters for that letter as possible. And we need that particularly this year because we intend to ask for a bump in the amount.
Yes. So actually I'm reversing the order here. Here are the numbers we're attaching to our 2020 ask. So you can see, to Chad's point, we're requesting $35 million for 2020. This is a $15 million increase over last year.
Now, a lot of you who were involved with our advocacy efforts last year will remember that we pushed for $30 million last year, and we're very close to getting that number with an amendment on the House floor. But because of reasons out of our control, the sponsor of that amendment didn't make it to the floor in time to offer it, and that was a big blow. So this year, things are a little bit different in that our biggest champion on the House side, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, now sits in a key position on the Appropriations Committee, and working with her office, we've all have coalesced around a $35 million ask this year. So that's a significant increase, but it's something that we think is appropriate.
And to Chad's point, we're well positioned to get it. And during the training, we're going to go over the story and what happened last year because we really did have all the necessary support for $30 million. So we're taking that signal and running with it and hoping that 35 is what we can come in at for fiscal year 2020.
You'll see that we're requesting level funding for the Ovarian Cancer Control Initiative, and that would be consistent with the $9.5 million that we received last year. And for Johanna's Law, we're looking for an increase, a significant increase for that program. And that will also go in line with an effort that we have underway to reauthorize Johanna's Law. I don't want to get into that too much yet because we're not sure if the bill will actually be dropped in time for Advocacy Day. If it is, it's something that we'll push for people to support. But if it's not, we'll continue to push for a significant increase in funding for that piece of legislation.
That's right. And just to throw it back here, so this, we love this graph because it's a nice visual representation of the different allocations of federal funding in support of ovarian cancer. So you can see the colors correspond to the different programs. As you can see, National Institutes of Health, which is the parent agency for National Cancer Institute, it funds the lion's share of ovarian cancer research.
Yeah, that's the blue.
That's the blue there. But the other programs are, yeah, they are all blue. That's the, I guess, the royal blue. Or, well, it's the biggest bar. But one thing to highlight is the only dedicated ovarian cancer research program is through the DoD, and that's a big deal. It's both materially important because it's a lot of money, but also it's important symbolically because it really is a sign of importance when it comes to federal funding in our federal government, having your own standalone program. So we really, really care about that program and champion it, and are very hopeful that the 35 in funding will come through.
That's right. And historically, over the last few years, the whole research program of the Department of Defense has been under threat by really by just one senator that has, but it really put the program at risk. And now that senator, Mr. McCain, is no longer with us. God rest him, but that really removes an important obstacle to that program. So we're hopeful that we'll have fewer difficulties moving forward with the CDMRP or the Ovarian Cancer Research Program.
And again, we'll go over what the story was there, because there is a chance that someone else might take up the mantle, but this year we're feeling okay about it. Yeah. We're feeling in the safe. But we'll give you more of the story there to flesh out your understanding during the training. And then one other thing, if we move it back another couple of slides to the short list. So that last issue, the last bullets under each, the House. So joining the Congressional Ovarian Cancer Caucus, this is something that we are going to ask their House members to do. Caucuses, and we'll talk more about this at the training, but caucuses range in sort of level of seriousness and commitment. There's the Congressional Black Caucus, which is huge and taken quite seriously, but then there's also like the Congressional Cement Caucus. And each congressional sessions are 2 years long, so each Congress, all caucuses die and need to be re-registered, reactivated. And some caucuses have standing meetings. Other caucuses, it's more of just a living listserv, and you can count on caucus members to be supportive around things like Dear Colleagues or co-sponsoring bills or whatever. It's a great built-in network of support. So we always ask folks to ask their House members to become part of the caucus.
Yeah, and importantly, that's generally limited to the House. And so there are some caucuses that have Senate members listed, but they're not technically part of the caucus. That is limited to the House.
It's the House thing. And then, so that the last bullet under Senate ask there is an issue that is unfolding as we speak. It has to do with access to genetic testing under Medicare. And we're going to go over that issue in depth because there might be an ask attached to it to co-sponsor a particular bill, but we're going to ask that folks raise this at their Senate meetings to the extent that they can, because we said it's an issue that's unfolding in real time.
Yes.
And it has to do with Medicare coverage for survivors of ovarian cancer for germline genetic testing.
That's right.
Without getting too in the weeds.
So moving forward back to where we were, we've reached the end of our little presentation. So as I mentioned earlier, we do expect to send out more detailed descriptions of what our asks are electronically. So check your email at the end of next week. And I wish we could send them out to you earlier, but the thing is, things are so fluid here on Capitol Hill that it's difficult, and we want to make sure we give you the best, most accurate information. So you should expect us to send those out on Thursday. Furthermore, we'll have lots of materials for you when you're here in DC for training. So, is there anything else that you have, Vanessa?
No.
Okay, I see that we have about 10 or so, 15 minutes for questions. So, if you have any questions right now, I'll try to figure out how to unmute you all. And I can probably do that. If you note in the chat, especially, that you have a question, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I'll try to unmute everybody. Or I can unmute, I guess, people individually. So until I figure out how to do this, if you just note in the chat whether you have a question or not, that would be really helpful. Hold on. So that's a really long set of questions, Abram. So let us let us get into them one by one. So why don't you go ahead and read them out loud?
All right, and I can tell you already that this is going to require some follow-up. So these are drilling down on a lot of the substance of the issues. For drug pricing, how many ovarian cancer drugs will be affected by the President's IPI, which is the International Pricing Index Initiative? What will our response be to any questions about it? Truthfully, I don't anticipate there will be many questions about this to our constituents. But
we're starting to get a little bit more, but they're not really ready on that question. How many of the ovarian cancer drugs will be affected? They will all be affected in one way or another. That's for certain. I've had some conversation with pharma partners as well, and they're not quite sure how it's going to shake out with the IPI. But we're going to continue to get people prepared for that and probably develop some talking points on that specific element.
Yeah, so let's see, any dear colleagues. So we've got a dear colleague for OCRP. For Johanna's Law, at this point, we don't do dear colleagues for that. We're really trying to shore up support for the RIOS bill and are not going to waste the chits on a dear colleague for that. Hopefully I won't be eating my words, but...
Probably not a dear colleague. We'll probably try to get a lot of original co-sponsors
for the RIOS bill.
For the other requests, instead of a dear colleague for a lot of those, because they're not particularly controversial, we will request that people submit funding requests. Each member of Congress often has a portal by which constituents are allowed to urge them to support specific funding requests. We're going to try to make that available to people. A lot of them are online, but that'll be another part of the ask in meetings is if the member of Congress has a way for constituents to make requests.
Yeah, and the last two questions about what is the case for increased investment, so increased funding for OCRP, which is under the Department of Defense, and for Johanna's Law. So for both of those, that will be covered in the training. We're going to give you lots of concrete deliverables that you can point to. The great thing is there have been thorough evaluations for both programs. So there's a lot of really great evidence to point to that bolsters the argument for the increase.
For the OCRP, we know, for instance, that the pay lines are really low for that, and by which I mean there are a lot of strong proposals that are not able to be funded because of the low funding level. So our effort will be to increase those pay lines. For Johanna's Law, this is a program that has been underfunded for years, and there are limitations on what the CDC is able to do with the materials that they produce because the funding level is low. So we have great materials that will be available for that. They'll be part of the fact sheet for those particular asks. All right, let me scroll down. Let's see. How many people are attending this event? I think we have between close to 90 people that we expect to be there for this for the event this year, and that will be a nice, hefty crowd. So another is asking whether the bill numbers will be included. Yes, if there are bill numbers for any of the legislation that we're pushing, they'll be included. So for that, we'd be talking about the genetic testing information in the Senate. There could potentially be a bill there, or perhaps Johanna's Law reauthorization. There could be a bill number there. Those would both be included if they're dropped in time. Okay, what is this next question?
Since DC, including the federal government, was shut down for a snow day last week due to a severe snowstorm, will training still happen Monday and Tuesday if a similarly severe storm occurs, or will you reschedule? So that's a great question, and it's one that we're just going to wait and see what happens, kind of play it by ear. I will say I've been in DC for 10 years, and I feel like March is when we get weather, we get snow, March and February, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll be okay. Chad's checking the weather.
I'm telling you, it's going to be on Sunday. It's supposed to be 45 degrees with clouds and sun, and on Monday, 50 degrees. So that sounds pretty good. Considerable clouds on Tuesday the 5th. So you're going to need a jacket. But we're going to be open, and it's going to be exciting. Anything else? Okay, we have it's a great question. So the question about brainstorming to talk to reps and senators online via Twitter, Instagram. We're going to make sure that everybody has access to all their handles and all of their social media addresses and names. I like the bee emoji. If you can come up with something, a teal ribbon that we can get one of these platforms to put out there for us, that would be great. I'm not sure what's available now. We are going to talk about what the social media hashtags should be at the training in person, so make sure you're ready for that. And in the meantime, try to expand your social networks as large as possible so that when you arrive, you'll have hundreds and hundreds of followers, thousands of followers.
Growing your influence.
Just like I'm sure Vanessa does. So if there aren't any other questions, and I don't see any in the queue, we'll just thank you for attending. Thank you for being there for this training, and we can't wait to see you on the 4th and 5th. We've got a lot of meetings that have been scheduled and a lot more that will be scheduled over the next week or so. So come prepared, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out with any questions in the meantime.
Great. Thank you.